Our third project this semester is 10 string things and natural dyeing. This project will examine the use of materials, transformation, color, shape, and form to create interesting and dimensional fiber objects. The outcome of your project can be functional or non-functional, but must incorporate elements of dyeing, knotting, or weaving, utilizing only the material itself. Before we get into the project, I'll first take you through a brief history and overview of knotting techniques commonly called macrame and also natural dyeing. This information will help prepare you as you begin your next project. Now, decorative knot tying can be traced back to 3rd century China on ceremonial textiles as well as wall hangings. From Asia to the Incan Empire, we see examples of knots being used as a method for record keeping, with other practical uses, including the tying of fishing nets in ancient Greece. Indigenous communities have used knot tying for millennia. An example is the Alutiiq verb for tying a knot, laguni. It's related to terms used for tangled, confused, or impassable. In classical Alutiiq society, sturdy knotted ropes, cords, and lines were essential parts of many common tools. People secured harpoon points to shafts with twined cordage, towed sea mammal carcasses home with ropes tied to their kayaks, hunted birds with braided nooses, tied nets from nettle fiber, and retrieved fish from the ocean floor with hooks secured to long lines. Now, we won't spend a lot of time talking about weaving this lecture, and weaving is a way of forming fabric by interlacing threads. But it's important to highlight the rich cultural history and tradition of this art form in Indigenous communities. The origin of macrame as we know it today is generally attributed to Arabic weavers during the 13th century, using decorative knots to finish the loose ends of hand-woven textiles. Macrame made its way to Europe after the North African invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. In their travels from North Africa to Europe, these peoples introduced macrame to Spain, who in turn introduced it to France in the 15th century, and then Italy in the 16th century. The Crusades to the Middle East also introduced macrame to areas of Europe, like Italy. This knotting technique was then incorporated into lace-making techniques because its ease of application and speed in comparison to the finer fiber techniques used in traditional lace making. Sailors then embraced this knot tying technique while at sea. The knots had many practical uses aboard their ships, but also kept them occupied during their long trips abroad. The sailors would also then sell and barter their knotted goods like hammocks, belts, and hats while they were at port. You may have heard of several macrame knots, also called nautical knots, and this is where that comes from. Macrame and knot tying began to wane in popularity after the late 19th century, but made a comeback in the 1970s. Macrame became an anti-industrialist symbol in their larger counterculture movement of the time. Today, we see macrame again gaining popularity in interior design with items like plant hangers and hanging wall tapestries. Humans have been tying knots for millennia, and it is always important to reflect on the rich cultural traditions and histories that have shaped the techniques that we explore and incorporate in our art-making practices. As you work through this project, and you find yourself wanting to know more about the natural dyeing process, I recommend the book Wild Color by Jenny Dean. Now, of course, there are really great resources on the internet, but this guide is comprehensive and a really great tool to have on hand. Now, evidence of well-developed dye works exist in many parts of the world. Ancient Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Peruvians were known for their excellent dyeing. Italian dyers were among the best from Roman times through the 16th century. Dyers from India were supreme in dyeing cotton, and dyers in China specialized in dyeing silk. Natural dyes were also major trade items throughout history until the development of synthetic dyes. There are two types of dyes, natural dyes and synthetic. Natural dyes come from animal or plant sources, while synthetic dyes are man-made. Natural dyes may be of plant origin and extracted from roots, wood, bark, berries, lichens, leaves, flowers, nuts, and seeds, or come from insects and shellfish and mineral compounds. Natural dyes were the only source of color for textiles, leather, basketry, and other materials until synthetic dyes were developed in the latter half of the 19th century. Some examples of synthetic dyes might be items you might find at the grocery store, like a RIT dye. Now, natural dyes are either adjective or additive dyes, or they're substantive dyes. Adjective or additive dyes must use a mordant, which is a chemical that affixes the dye to the fiber. It creates a bond with the fibers. These types of dyes are the most common type and have been used for at least 2,000 years. Now, substantive dyes bond with the fiber without the use of an additional mordant, or they already contain a natural mordant like a tannin. Turmeric is an example of a substantive dye. Turmeric is also a great natural dye to begin with. It produces a warm gold color on undyed natural cotton fabrics, silk, or wool. Turmeric is also a fugitive dye, which means that it will fade over time. Madder root is an adjective or additive dye. It is color fast, which means that its pigment will adhere and long last onto the fabric, and there's less of a chance of that fading over time. And with madder root, it produces an orangey red that is color fast. For deeper reds, you may want to experiment with a mordant such as alum. Now, mordants, a little bit more about mordants. Mordants are just chemical compounds that combine with the fiber and the dye and form a chemical bridge or connection between the fiber and the dye, and it helps to affix that dye to the fiber, so it creates a more color fast, it creates a more intense and a more successful outcome. Some common mordants that we find are weak organic acids, such as acetic or tannic acid, and then also metal salts, like aluminum, ammonium, or potassium sulfate, ferrous sulfate, and copper sulfate. A fugitive dye is one that does not last, and a color fast dye is one that does. You may hear of fugitive dyes also being called salvage dyes, and these are things like beets, onion skins, turmeric, black beans, berries, or avocado skins. Color fast, again, is a dye that will not fade over time, and it can be further broken into two different types of lasting. Light fastness, which is how long it will last when exposed to the light, and then wash fastness, how long it will last during repeated washings. Color fast dyes are things like plants, like indigo, woad, weld, or goldenrod, nuts like walnut, insects like cochineal, and roots like madder root. These are all color fast, meaning they will last over time as they're exposed to the light or washing. Now, there are several steps in preparing your fiber and your dye for natural dyeing. The first thing you want to do, of course, is acquire your material, and then you're going to clean it. And this cleaning process is called scouring. And scouring is really a way of cleaning your material to remove any type of excess debris, particulates, or contamination that have penetrated that fiber during its production or processing. It's a deep cleaning. Next, if your fiber or dye, if your dye requires it, you'll be adding a mordant to the water that your dye will be going to. And then you'll either be you'll be adding a mordant to the water that your fiber will be going to. And then you'll either be extracting the dye if you're using raw materials, or you'll be creating your dye bath, which is adding your dye to the vat of water that your fiber will go in. Next, if you are using any types of additives or modifiers like a cream of tartar, which sometimes enhances the vibrancy of the dye, you'll add that to your dye bath. And then finally, once your dye is complete and you've achieved the color that you want, you'll remove that fiber from the dye bath and extract the water by washing it. You may also want to dry in the color, removing that fiber from the bath and allowing it to dry with the color set in before you wash it. And with washing it, you just want to gently wring it out, gently push it out, and run it until the water runs clean. I do go over all of this in the demo that is included in this project. Some other natural dyes you can experiment with are things that you can find just in your kitchen, like black beans, tea, walnuts, onion skins, avocado peels, blackberries, wine, and a ton more. I will provide some links on Blackboard to different recipes for natural dyeing, but I encourage you to do your own research and also do your own experimentation. Just a quick note about PPE. Natural dyeing is generally really safe, but there are still some things that you don't want to expose yourself to, like some of those metal salts like alum, some of that preparation like washing soda. These things can be harmful if left on your skin too long or if inhaled and digested. So you really want to make sure that you're protecting your body and you're also protecting your space. And so personal protective equipment is really important. Gloves, rubber gloves, latex gloves, a desk mask or respirator, gloves or eye protection, and of course an apron to protect your clothes and body. The other tools that you need are elements for the dyeing itself. So I use stock pots, 8 to 12 quart stock pots, but any various pots will help. A wooden or metal spoon. I use tongs as well to help with my fibers. A measuring devices, a colander or something for straining. I also use cheesecloth to really help get out any particles or chunks, your fiber, your dyes, and a stovetop or single burner. I also want to note that if you are using these kitchen utensils for your dyeing, you should not be then reusing them for food. So go to the thrift store, get some old junky kitchen utensils that you can dedicate just for your dyeing practices, because some of these elements that you're using are not food safe and you do not want to cross-contaminate. I do have a station set up at the Sculpture Lab. So if you just want to go to the Sculpture Lab to use the materials there, you are welcome to do that. An additional note about safety. So again, natural dyes are safe, but some of these mordants, some of these elements that you might be using can be harmful if inhaled or caustic if they're on the skin too long. And so you want to make sure that you're using these in a well-ventilated area. If you're in your kitchen, put the fan on, and also wear your respirator or desk mask. You don't want to be inhaling the fumes of that alum as it's cooking in your pot, or inhale the powders of your washing soda as you're putting that in your pot. And again, that dyeing equipment should never be used to cook with for food. It's not safe for consumption. And so if you're using pots and spoons and tongs, that is your fiber, that is your dyeing equipment, and it is not your eating equipment. So make sure that you're using junky, cheap, secondhand stuff that you're not going to be using to eat with. And then again, wear your protective gear. All right, and now the project. So again, I do have a demo on different macrame, knot tying and weaving techniques that you can do with just your hands. And I also have a demo on natural dyeing with turmeric. So please watch that demo for several different strategies for creating some knot tying techniques and natural dyeing. So the project is to create 10 unique fiber objects out of string. That could be rope, cord, or yarn. I've provided you with some basic cotton cord, some basic cotton rope, and macrame cord, but you are welcome to to use your own, this could be, you could get more cord or rope, or you could even incorporate yarn or strings or other items of that nature. And these string things, these fiber objects, must only utilize a natural fiber, such as unbleached or natural cotton, linen, wool, silk, bamboo, etc. You cannot use synthetics like polyester, nylon, or rayon for this project. You can also not use already colored fibers or wools or yarns that you might get at the fiber store. And then additionally, they must be shaped or formed using only hand or tactile approaches, such as tying, knotting, or weaving techniques. 5 of those 10 objects must include color in some way, and then 5 must be natural. So this project is challenging you to transform the materials through tactile manipulation and coloration. Again, I want you to create 10 total string things out of natural, and the best would be raw or unbleached materials. If you can only find bleached cotton, for example, that would be acceptable. You can also use other natural fibers like linen, bamboo, wool, or silk, but no synthetics. And again, your synthetics are your rayons, your polyesters, and your nylons. 5 of those 10 must incorporate natural dyeing in some way, and you're required to use at least 1 natural dye. In the demo, I've walked you through how to dye with turmeric, but in your toolkit, I've also included madder root. So you're required to use at least 1 of those dyes, but if you do 2 or more, you will receive extra credit. These 10 string things might be functional, like a wearable art piece, or they might be non-functional, like a fiber art piece. And again, you may not use fibers that have already been treated with a colorant. So you can't go to Michael's and grab some blue yarn that you didn't dye yourself. And for this, I want you to submit at least 3 photographs, 1 that shows all of your 10 string things, 1 that shows the 5 with dye, and 1 that shows the 5 without dye, and then any other detail shot that you want to include, or if there are videos that you want to include. So again, what is not acceptable in this project? Fibers that have already been treated with a colorant, blue yarn from Michael's, synthetic fibers, nylon, polyester, rayon, synthetic or chemical dyes, RIT dye, for example, any type of wire foam, or any other type of armature that you will shape your project around is not acceptable. And then any other specific weaving, knitting, crocheting tools like knitting needles to actually make the weave, crochet hooks, or a loom, or any other type of specific tools, a latch hook, these are not acceptable. You must create that with your hands. In the demo, I do show you a finger weaving technique that is just creating that weave in your hands. Now you could use other tools to like latch on your rope while you're working on a macrame knot, for example, or a tool to kind of pull out your string or rope if you need that as you're working with it. But you can't use any tools that are going to be shaping or creating the weave or knot. So what I want you to think about as you're creating these projects is how can you use the knotting, weaving, or wrapping to build up your base material to create an interesting and dimensional fiber object? How can you use color in interesting and inventive ways? And what method of application will you use for applying color? Will you dip dye only elements and create kind of a color gradation? Will you submerge the full object in your dye bath? Will you paint the dye on? Will you use a kind of tie and dyeing technique like shibori? Will you use a wax or glue resist technique like batik? What type of application of color will you use? And then will your object be functional? Will it be like a wearable art piece, or will it be non-functional, like a standalone fiber art piece? This project, can be a little bit time intensive because you're making 10 separate objects. So I want to see that you've gotten a start. And then our critiques will be due a week after deadline. Again, at least 3 images, one of the full collection of all 10, one of the 5 undyed, one of the 5 dyed, and then any other images that you want to send. And just a note about images and how you're naming and titling your images. Please, 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 as you're saving your images, save them with the artwork title. So if you don't have a title, save it 10 string things, and then your name and the medium. So it would be 10 string things, undyed, your name, cotton or wool or what have you. 10 string things, dyed, your name, cotton or wool. 10 string things, detail shot, your name, cotton or wool, example. That way it's easier for me as I build the gallery. And finally, happy art making. Please email me if you have any questions along the way. This is a really fun, tactile process, and I really look forward to seeing your 10 string